Elena Vasquez walked into the lecture hall with her head down and her shoulders hunched forward, like she was trying to make herself as small as possible. And nobody looked at her twice because nobody ever looked at her twice, which was exactly how she wanted it to be. The hall was massive and filled with over 300 alien students from dozens of different worlds, and Elena was the only human among them. A fact that should have made her stand out but somehow never did, because she had perfected the art of being invisible over many years of practice and necessity. She found her usual seat at the very back of the room, right next to the emergency exit, with a clear view of every entrance and a solid wall behind her so nothing could sneak up from that direction. And she pulled out her datapad and pretended to review her notes while her eyes scanned the room in a way that looked casual, but was anything but casual. Corvath Interstellar University was one of the most prestigious schools in the galaxy, accepting students from over 200 different species. And humans were still relatively new to the galactic stage, so Elena's presence here was supposed to be remarkable. But she had worked very hard to make sure it was not. She wore clothes that were slightly too big for her small frame, and her brown hair was always pulled back in a messy ponytail. And her glasses were thick and unfashionable, and always seemed to have smudges on them even though she cleaned them constantly. And all of this was very much on purpose. The Thalaxians who sat in the front row were massive four-armed predators with scales the color of dried blood. And they were the dominant species in the athletics department because their homeworld had gravity twice as strong as Earth's. And they called Elena the Ghost when they bothered to acknowledge her existence at all, which was not very often. The Valkyrie were crystalline beings who glowed with soft inner light and were famous across 12 systems for their incredible intelligence. And they looked at Elena with something like pity, because they assumed she was just a timid little creature from a barely spacefaring world who had somehow gotten a scholarship she did not deserve. Her roommate was a Morellian named Zix, who had bright purple skin and 4 eyes and a mouth that never stopped talking. And Zix thought Elena was sweet but painfully shy and probably needed to come out of her shell more and make some friends and stop studying so much. None of them knew the truth, and Elena intended to keep it that way for as long as she possibly could. The professor entered the room and began the lecture on xenobiology, specifically the reproductive cycles of silicon-based life forms. And Elena took careful notes because she genuinely found this subject fascinating, even though her presence at this university had nothing to do with her love of alien plants and everything to do with hiding. You see, there was a name that was whispered in fear across 12 star systems, a name that made hardened criminals check under their beds at night. A name that had been declared an extinction-class threat by the Galactic Bounty Registry after a single individual had destroyed the entire Crimson Veil Syndicate in just 7 standard days. That name was the Hollow, and the Hollow was Elena Vasquez. And Elena Vasquez was currently taking notes on how crystal flowers pollinated each other through harmonic vibration. She had killed 47 members of the Syndicate without hesitation or mercy, tracking them across 3 planets and 2 space stations. And she had done it so efficiently and so quietly that most of them never even knew she was coming until it was far too late. The bounty on her head was currently sitting at 80 million galactic credits, which was enough money to buy a small moon. And there were hunters and assassins and mercenaries across the galaxy who would do anything to collect that bounty. But they were looking for a monster, a terrifying figure of death and shadow. And they would never think to look at this quiet little human girl with the smudged glasses, who sat in the back of a xenobiology class and worried about her upcoming midterm exam. Elena had chosen this university very carefully because it was far from the major trade routes and it had excellent security, and most importantly, it was boring. Wonderfully and beautifully boring. The kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened. She had 17 days until her next contract activated. 17 days of peace and quiet and normal student life. and she intended to enjoy every single moment of it. A Thalaxian in the front row made a joke about humans being too weak to survive outside their protective bubbles, and several students laughed. And Elena did not react at all, because reacting would draw attention, and drawing attention was the last thing she wanted. She had heard far worse over the years, had been underestimated and dismissed and mocked by creatures who thought that size and strength and natural weapons were what made a predator dangerous. And every single one of those creatures had learned the truth eventually, usually in the last few seconds of their lives. But Elena was not here to teach lessons or prove points or defend the honor of her species. She was here to study plants and pretend to be normal, and maybe, just maybe, remember what it felt like to be something other than a weapon. The lecture ended, and students began filing out of the hall, talking and laughing and making plans for lunch. And Elena packed up her datapad slowly, so she would be one of the last to leave, because crowds made her uncomfortable in ways she could not fully explain. She walked across the beautiful campus with its alien trees and floating fountains and buildings, made of materials that Earth scientists were still trying to understand. And she felt something strange in her chest that might have been peace, or might have been loneliness, or might have been both at the same time. A group of Varathi students walked past her, their scales gleaming in the light of the twin suns. And their leader was a massive male named Krathvex, who was the son of a warlord and the most feared student on campus. And he did not even glance at the small human girl who stepped out of his way. Elena watched him go with eyes that tracked his movement and cataloged his weaknesses and calculated exactly how she would kill him if she ever needed to. And then she blinked and shook her head and reminded herself that she was a student now. Just a student, nothing more. She had a midterm to study for, and that was the only thing that mattered. And she was going to hold on to this fragile, normal life for as long as the universe would let her, even if she knew deep down that it could not last forever. The Hollow did not get to have a normal life, but Elena Vasquez was going to try anyway. And that small act of defiance against her own nature was perhaps the bravest thing she had ever done. 3 days passed without incident, and Elena began to relax just a little bit, which was her first mistake, because relaxing meant she let her guard down, and letting her guard down meant she stopped being invisible, and stopping being invisible meant she got noticed. It happened in the dining hall during lunch hour, when the massive room was packed with students from every corner of the galaxy, all of them eating strange foods and speaking strange languages, and generally ignoring the small human girl who sat alone at a corner table with her back to the wall. Krathvex was in a bad mood that day because his father had sent him an angry message about his grades. And when Krathvex was in a bad mood, he liked to hurt things because that was how his species dealt with negative emotions. And he was looking for something to hurt when his 4 eyes landed on Elena, a human sitting alone, looking small and weak and utterly defenseless, the perfect target for a predator who needed to feel powerful again. He walked over to her table with his entourage of 6 other Varathi students following close behind. And the other students in the dining hall noticed and quickly looked away, because everyone knew what happened when Krathvex chose a victim and nobody wanted to get involved. Elena was eating a bowl of synthesized rice and vegetables, a simple meal that reminded her of home. And she did not look up when the massive shadow fell across her table, because she had sensed him coming from the moment he stood up. "Your kind does not belong here," Krathvex hissed in a voice that was designed by evolution to freeze prey in place with fear. And his venom glands pulsed visibly beneath the scales of his neck as his entourage laughed at his words. Elena continued eating, her chopsticks moving with mechanical precision, her eyes fixed on her food. Krathvex did not like being ignored, because being ignored was the same as being disrespected, and being disrespected meant he had to make an example or his reputation would suffer. So he reached down and knocked her datapad off the table, and it clattered loudly on the floor. "Perhaps I should teach you your place, little mammal," he said with a smile that showed all of his razor-sharp teeth. And his entourage laughed again because that was what they were supposed to do. Elena finally spoke, her voice quiet and calm and completely without emotion. "I have a test tomorrow. Please do not make me miss it." The dining hall erupted in laughter because this tiny human girl was worried about a test while a Varathi warlord's son was threatening to tear her apart. And Krathvek's scales flushed dark red with humiliation because she had made him look foolish without even trying. His rage boiled over and he grabbed her shoulder, his claws digging into her flesh through her oversized sweater. And he intended to drag her out of her seat and throw her across the room to teach her a lesson about respect. But then something strange happened, something that would haunt Krathvex for the rest of his life. Her muscles beneath his grip were not soft like he expected. They were hard and dense and coiled like steel cables wrapped in silk. And there was so much strength hidden in that small frame that his instincts screamed at him to let go immediately. And then she looked up at him, and her eyes were wrong. They were human eyes, brown and ordinary, but there was nothing behind them. No fear, no anger, no emotion of any kind, just emptiness. Vast and cold and ancient, like looking into the void between stars. Krathvex was a Varathi, a species that had evolved as apex predators on a world where everything was designed to kill. And his ancestors had survived for millions of years by knowing when they were facing something more dangerous than themselves. Every single instinct in his body, instincts that had been honed by countless generations of evolution, screamed at him that he was not looking at prey right now. He was looking at something that could kill him faster than he could blink. "Tomorrow," Elena repeated in that same quiet voice. "I have a test tomorrow." Her hand had not moved, but Krathvex suddenly became aware that if she wanted to, she could reach his throat before he could react. She could break his wrist before he could pull away. She could end his life in a dozen different ways. And there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop her. He released her shoulder and stepped back, telling himself that she was beneath his notice, that humans were not worth his time, that he had better things to do than bully vermin. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was afraid, truly and genuinely afraid, for the first time in his entire life. His entourage looked confused because they had never seen Krathvex back down from anyone. And he snarled at them to follow him, and they left the dining hall quickly. And the other students whispered among themselves about what had just happened. Elena picked up her datapad from the floor and checked it for damage, and then went back to eating her rice as if nothing had happened. Because for her, nothing had happened. This was just another moment in a life filled with such moments. She had not wanted to reveal herself, had not wanted to show anything of what she truly was. But Krathvex had pushed too hard, and her body had reacted automatically, dropping the mask just long enough for him to see the predator beneath. It was a mistake, a small one, but mistakes had a way of growing larger over time, and Lena knew that she would need to be more careful from now on. Krathvex did not sleep that night, lying awake in his expensive quarters and staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what he had seen in that human's eyes. And no matter how hard he tried, he could not shake the feeling that he had almost died today. His species had a word for creatures like her. Creatures who wore the skin of prey, but were actually something else entirely. Something ancient and terrible and utterly without mercy. And that word translated roughly to hollow predator. He did not know that across the galaxy, bounty hunters and assassins used a very similar name when they spoke of the most dangerous hunter in existence. A human woman who had killed more targets than anyone in recorded history. He did not know that the quiet girl he had tried to bully was worth 80 million credits dead, or that dozens of professional killers were searching for her right now, or that some of them were getting very close. All he knew was that something was very wrong with that human, and he intended to stay as far away from her as possible for the rest of his time at this university. Elena finished her dinner and walked back to her dormitory and studied for her test until midnight. And she tried very hard not to think about the look on Krathvek's face when he had finally understood what he was dealing with. She was so tired of being a monster, so tired of seeing fear in the eyes of everyone who learned the truth about her. And she wondered if there would ever be a time when she could just be Elena. Just a girl who liked plants and quiet evenings and the way the campus smelled after rain. But that was a dream, and the Hollow did not get to dream, and tomorrow she had a test to pass. The assassins came on a Tuesday, 6 of them moving through the darkness like shadows made flesh. And they were the best killers that money could buy, which meant they were very good at their job, but not quite good enough. They called themselves the Pale Court, a name that was spoken with fear in certain circles. And they had been tracking the Hollow for 2 long years across dozens of planets and space stations, following whispers and corpses and the faint trail of death that she left behind. The leader was a Silthkai named Vorn, a creature that looked like a spider made of smoke and darkness. And he had been killing for 400 years and had never once failed to complete a contract. And he was absolutely certain that tonight would be no different. They had found her hiding in the last place anyone would think to look. A boring university on a boring planet, pretending to be a boring student. And Vorn had to admit he was impressed by her cleverness, even as he planned her death. The dormitory was quiet at 3 in the morning. All the students asleep in their various beds and pods and tanks depending on their species. And the assassins moved through the hallways with thermal dampeners, hiding their body heat and sound suppressors muffling their footsteps. They reached the room that belonged to Alana Vasquez and her Morellian roommate. And Vorn sent 2 of his people to disable the security systems while the others prepared their weapons. Neural disruptors that would paralyze a target instantly and painfully. The Morellian was easy, a quick burst of energy that froze her in her sleep gel pod without waking her, and she would never know how close to death she had come that night. Vorn approached the human's bed with the confidence of a predator who had done this thousands of times before, and he raised his disruptor and aimed at the shape beneath the blankets and fired. The blankets collapsed flat because there was nothing underneath them except pillows arranged to look like a sleeping body, and Vorn felt something he had not felt in a very long time. "Fear." "Behind you," said a voice that was quiet and calm and completely without emotion, like the sound of winter wind blowing through dead trees. Vorn spun around, and there she was, standing in the doorway of the bathroom, wearing an oversized sleep shirt with a cartoon alien on it. Her hair messy, and her feet bare, and her glasses sitting on the sink behind her. She looked so small and young and harmless, and if Vorn had not known better, he would have laughed at the idea that this was the most dangerous hunter in the galaxy. But he did know better, and he could see her eyes now, and her eyes were empty in a way that made his 400 years of experience mean absolutely nothing. "The Syndicate should have stayed dead," Elena said in that same quiet voice. "Now I have to explain things again. Vorn attacked because attacking was better than waiting. And he was fast, incredibly fast, faster than almost any creature in known space. And his blade was aimed perfectly at her throat." Elena moved, not with speed, but with efficiency. Every motion precisely calculated to use the minimum energy for the maximum effect. And suddenly Vorn's blade was in her hand instead of his, and his arm was broken in 3 places. He screamed, or tried to scream, but her other hand was already on his throat, and squeezing, and the sound died before it could escape. The other 5 assassins rushed into the room, and what happened next would have looked like chaos to anyone watching, but it was actually the opposite of chaos. It was perfect control, every movement flowing into the next like water flowing downhill. Elena used Vorn's body as a shield against the first 2 attackers. then threw him into the third, while simultaneously kicking the fourth in a spot that her knowledge of alien anatomy told her would cause instant paralysis. The fifth assassin was a Kethrani, a species with 4 arms and redundant organs, and he thought his natural advantages would help him survive. But Elena had killed 17 Kethrani before, and she knew exactly where to strike. The sixth assassin tried to run, because he was smart enough to know when a fight was lost. But Elena was between him and the door, and there was no escape from a hunter who had decided you were prey. 11 seconds. That was how long the fight lasted. 11 seconds from start to finish. And when it was over, there were 6 bodies on the floor, and Elena was not even breathing hard. She looked down at the assassins and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, no emotion of a kind. Because when she was in this state, she was not really Elena anymore. She was the hollow, and the hollow did not feel. The state faded slowly, like waking up from a dream, and Elena became aware that her sleep shirt had blood on it, and that her hands were shaking slightly, and that her roommate was still frozen in her pod. She pulled out a small device and pressed a button, and the paralysis field around Zix deactivated. But Zix did not wake up because the device also released a mild sedative that would keep her asleep until morning. Zix would think she had simply slept through the night, and she would never know that 6 professional killers had been in her room, and Elena intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. She dragged the bodies into the hallway and arranged them neatly against the wall. And then she accessed the security system and looped the footage so there would be no record of what had happened. And then she filed a noise complaint about a disturbance in the hall using her student account. Campus security would find the bodies, and there would be an investigation, and everyone would wonder what had happened. But there would be no evidence pointing to the quiet human girl who lived in the room next to where the bodies were found. Elena took a shower and changed into clean clothes and tried to stop her hands from shaking. And she looked at herself in the mirror and saw the same face she always saw, ordinary and forgettable, and hiding something terrible beneath. She had a test in 5 hours, and she needed to sleep. But sleep would not come because her mind was still running through the fight, analyzing every movement, looking for ways she could have been faster or more efficient. This was what she hated most about herself, the way her brain refused to turn off. The way it kept calculating and planning and preparing for violence, even when she desperately wanted to think about anything else. She lay down on her bed and stared at the ceiling and counted backwards from 1,000. A technique she had learned years ago to calm her mind. And eventually, sleep came and took her away from the blood and the bodies and the empty feeling in her chest. Tomorrow she would take her test and pretend to be normal and hope that no one else came looking for the hollow. But she knew that hope was foolish because they would always come. They would never stop coming. And eventually, her careful disguise would fall apart completely. But that was tomorrow's problem, and right now she needed to sleep. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. 6 members of the infamous Pale Court found dead at a small university on a backwater planet. And suddenly, Korvath Interstellar University was the most famous school in known space. Reporters came from dozens of worlds, their ships filling the sky above campus. And government officials arrived demanding answers. And armored warships from 3 different civilizations took up positions in orbit, because everyone wanted to know the same thing. Who had killed the Pale Court, and were they still here? Zix did not understand what was happening because she had slept through the whole thing. And she did not understand why there were soldiers everywhere and why the news networks kept showing pictures of their dormitory building. She especially did not understand why her quiet little roommate was sitting cross-legged on her bed, calmly taking apart a plasma rifle that had apparently been hidden inside the stuffed animal Elena kept on her shelf. "Elena," Zix said in a voice that was trying very hard not to shake. "What is happening?" Elena looked up from the rifle and Zix saw something in her eyes that she had never seen before. Something that looked like sadness or regret or maybe just exhaustion. "I made a mistake coming here," Elena said quietly, her hands still moving automatically as they cleaned and checked each component of the weapon. "I thought I could have something normal, a degree, maybe some friends. Something that was not blood and silence." She reassembled the rifle in 4 seconds without looking at it, her fingers knowing exactly where each piece belonged. "But people like me do not get normal, Zix. We just get intervals between violence." Zix's 4 eyes were very wide, and her purple skin had gone pale, and she wanted to run, but she also wanted to understand. Because Elena was her friend, or at least she had thought Elena was her friend. "Who are you?" Zix whispered. "What are you?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, and then she began to talk, and the story she told was like something from a nightmare. She explained that when humans first made contact with the galactic community, every new species was required to undergo biological and psychological screening to assess their threat level. And most species were classified as harmless or minimal threat or moderate threat, depending on their natural abilities. Humans were different. Humans were confusing, because they had no natural weapons and no armor and no venom and no special powers. They were soft and small and weak by galactic standards. But there was something in their minds that made the screeners very nervous. They called it persistence predation, a hunting strategy that humans had evolved over millions of years, where instead of chasing prey and catching it quickly, humans would follow their prey for hours or even days, never stopping, never resting, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion and fear. Most humans had this trait in a mild form. It showed up as stubbornness or determination, or the refusal to give up even when things seemed hopeless. And it was considered interesting but not particularly dangerous. But some humans had the trait in its pure form, a state where they could shut off fear and hesitation and empathy and become something else entirely. Something ancient and terrible, a perfect predator with no weaknesses. Elena was one of those humans, and she was perhaps the most extreme example ever recorded. Galactic psychologists had a name for her condition: predator null state, a condition where her conscious mind could completely disconnect from her actions, allowing her body to fight without any of the limitations that emotions normally created. The Bounty Guild had found her when she was young, had trained her, had turned her into a weapon, and she had been the Hollow ever since, the most efficient killer in known space. "I have killed more people than I can count," Elena said, and her voice was flat and empty. "I have destroyed entire criminal organizations by myself. I have hunted targets across star systems. I have done things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life." Zix was crying now, tears running down her purple cheeks, and she did not know if she was crying for Elena or because of Elena or both. "Do you enjoy it?" Zix asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena was quiet for a very long time, and when she finally spoke her voice was different, softer, and more human. "I enjoy the test I passed yesterday," she said. "I enjoy the way the campus smells after rain. I enjoy sitting in the dining hall and eating rice and pretending to be normal. I enjoy talking to someone who does not want anything from me except friendship." She stood up and slung the rifle over her shoulder and looked at Zix with eyes that were no longer empty. "That is why I have to leave, to protect the things I have started to enjoy. To protect you." Outside the window, more ships were arriving. Military vessels with weapons hot and soldiers ready to deploy. And Elena knew that she had run out of time, that her careful disguise had finally fallen apart. Krathvex stood at the edge of the security perimeter, watching the chaos with wide eyes, and he finally understood what he had seen in the dining hall that day. He had not been looking at a weak human. He had been looking at something his entire species had evolved to recognize and fear. A perfect predator wearing the disguise of prey. A creature that had chosen to pretend to be harmless when it was actually the most dangerous thing on the planet. His people had stories about creatures like that. Ancient legends passed down through generations. Warnings about monsters that wore friendly faces and smiled while they killed. The Hollow, they called her across the galaxy. And now Krathvex understood why that name was spoken with such fear. Back in the dormitory, Elena was gathering her few belongings, and Zix was following her and talking rapidly and trying to convince her not to go. "You do not have to do this," Zix said. "You do not have to run. Maybe we can figure something out. Maybe there is another way." Elena stopped and turned and looked at her friend. Her only friend, and she smiled. A real smile. Warm and sad and human. "You are a good person, Zix," Elena said. "Thank you for treating me like a person instead of a weapon. Even if it was only because you did not know the truth." She reached out and touched Zix's cheek gently. "I will remember this. I will remember you. And maybe someday when the galaxy has forgotten about the Hollow, I will come back and we can finish our xenobiology class together." She walked toward the door and Zix called after her. "Elena, wait, what are you going to do?" Elena paused at the doorway, and her shoulders straightened and her whole body seemed to change, becoming something harder and colder and more dangerous. "There are people out there who want to hurt this university to get to me," she said without turning around. "I am going to make sure that does not happen." And then she was gone, and Zix was alone. And outside the window, the sky was full of warships, and the air was full of fear. And somewhere in the chaos, a small human girl was walking toward danger with empty eyes and steady hands. The Dominion fleet arrived 3 hours later. 12 massive warships bearing the banner of Lord Vexthur, the most powerful warlord in the Varathi Empire and father of Krathvex. And they filled the sky like a promise of death. Lord Vexthur had learned that the Hollow was on Korvath, and he intended to claim her skull as a trophy for his collection, a prize that would make him legendary among his people for generations to come. The university was surrounded. Evacuation was impossible. 3,000 students and 200 faculty members were trapped on campus with nowhere to go. And the only thing standing between them and annihilation was a single human woman. Elena walked out of the main campus building alone, unarmed except for a small knife hidden in her boot, still wearing her university hoodie with the school logo on the front. And she stopped in the middle of the central plaza and looked up at the warships that blotted out the sky. She smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted prey. "Lord Vexthur," her voice rang out across all frequencies, because she had hacked into the communication systems during her walk across campus. "You have made a mistake, a very big mistake." The warlord's face appeared on screens across the campus, scaled and scarred and arrogant, and he laughed at the sight of this tiny human challenging him. "You think you can threaten me, little mammal?" he roared. "I have 12 warships and 10,000 soldiers. What do you have?" Elena tilted her head slightly, like she was considering the question. "You think surrounding me with your fleet makes you the predator and me the prey," she said. And her voice was still calm and quiet. "But that is not how humans think. You see, my species evolved on a death world." She began walking toward the landing zone, where Varathi shock troops were already assembling. Hundreds of them, massive and armored and ready to kill. "Everything on our planet tried to kill us," Elena continued. "The animals, the plants, the weather, even the tiny creatures we could not see, and we did not survive by being faster or stronger or more venomous." The soldiers raised their weapons and took aim at this small figure approaching them without fear. "We survived because we do not stop, because we can chase prey until its heart gives out from fear and exhaustion. Because when you corner us, when you threaten the things we have decided to protect," her eyes changed, going empty and cold and utterly devoid of anything that could be called human emotion. "We stopped being civilized." The first Varathi soldier charged. A massive warrior, twice Elena's height, with armor that could stop a plasma bolt. And he swung his vibroblade in an arc that should have cut her in half. Elena moved, not fast but efficient, every motion precisely calculated. And suddenly, the soldier was on the ground with his own blade in his throat, and Elena was already moving toward the next target. "I was trying to be a normal girl," she said as she killed another soldier. "I was going to graduate, get a job in botanical research. Maybe ask my roommate to get coffee sometime." 3 more soldiers fell, then 5, then 10. And Elena moved through them like a ghost, like a shadow, like something from a nightmare that could not be stopped or slowed or killed. "You took that from me." Lord Vexter watched from his command ship as his elite guard, warriors who had conquered entire worlds, were systematically destroyed by a creature half their size wearing a hoodie with a cartoon alien on it. "What is she?" he breathed, his scales going pale with something that might have been fear. "What is that thing?" His tactical advisor was ancient and wise, a Vorathi who had served 3 generations of warlords, and he spoke in a voice that trembled. "She is human, my lord, and we have made the mistake that every species eventually makes." "What mistake?" "We assume that because they are small and soft and kind, they are not dangerous." The advisor watched Elena tear through another squad without slowing down. "But humans are not apex predators because of their bodies, my lord. They are apex predators because of what lives inside their minds." Elena was at the center of the landing zone now, surrounded by bodies, her hoodie stained red and her hands steady and her eyes empty. "They are endurance hunters," the advisor continued, "and she has decided that everyone who threatened this place is now her prey." The battle lasted 6 hours. Elena did not stop, did not rest, did not slow down. She moved from squad to squad and ship to ship, finding weaknesses and exploiting them, turning the Dominion's weapons against itself, fighting with a precision and efficiency that should not have been possible. By the end, the Dominion fleet was crippled. 8 ships destroyed and 4 captured. Lord Vexter was in galactic custody and screaming about revenge that would never come. And 10,000 soldiers had learned what it meant to face a human who had decided to hunt. Elena sat on the steps of the library as the sun rose, covered in soot and blood that was not hers, her hoodie ruined and her hands finally shaking now that the fight was over. And she watched the sky turn gold and felt the warmth on her face. Zix found her there and sat down beside her without saying anything, just being present, just being a friend. "I am going to miss my makeup exam," Elena said finally, her voice tired and rough. "I think Professor Keth will give you an extension," Zix replied. Elena laughed, a small and tired sound that was wonderfully human. They sat together in silence as emergency. Vehicles flew overhead, and soldiers secured the campus, and reporters shouted questions that nobody answered. And Elena realized that her secret was gone forever, that everyone in the galaxy now knew that the quiet girl from Korvath University was the Hollow. "I cannot stay," Elena said quietly. "They will keep coming. More bounty hunters, more warlords, more people who want to prove they can kill the unkillable." "I know," Zix said. "I wanted to be normal. I wanted to be just Elena, but I do not think I get to have that." Zix reached over and took Elena's hand and held it tightly. "Maybe not," Zix said, "but you can visit, you can send messages. You can have a friend even if you cannot have a normal life." Elena looked at her roommate, this strange purple alien who had seen what she truly was and chosen to stay anyway. And she felt something warm in her chest that she had not felt in a very long time. Maybe she could not have normal. Maybe the Hollow would always be part of her. Maybe she would spend the rest of her life running and fighting and killing. But sitting here, watching the sunrise with someone who knew exactly what she was and cared about her anyway, she thought that maybe she could have something close to happiness. And that was enough. For now it was enough. "Thank you," Elena said softly, for seeing me, not the hollow, just me. Zick squeezed her hand. That is what friends are for, above them. The sky was clear and bright and full of possibility. And somewhere out in the galaxy, there were people who would come hunting for the hollow. But that was a problem for another day. Today, Elena Vasquez was going to sit with her friend and watch the sunrise and remember what it felt like to be human. And tomorrow, when the hunt began again, she would be ready.